In October of 2021, I took a cruise up and down the Hudson River in New York to fill a few gaps in my knowledge of American history. In 1609, Henry Hudson found this river and sailed up it on behalf of the Dutch in a futile search for a shortcut to Asia. He didn't get much further than where Albany is located today. My vessel of discovery, the American Constitution, provided a luxurious, scenic recreation of Henry Hudson's voyage, with lots to see along the way. My quarters were quite comfortable. The food was the best I have ever experienced on any cruise. And the friendships I made were a lot of fun. Meet Bebe, Betsy, Margaret, and Ed from the great state of Georgia. American Cruise Lines treated us to a multi-talented performer by the name of Robert Yansky, who we enjoyed as resident speaker.
However, the texture changes. Being able to eat something and wanting to eat something are not the same thing, and apples get what I call mealy.
Evening entertainer.
If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't
Thank you so much.
And master storyteller.
Of this place and its peculiar inhabitants, who are descendants from the original Dutch settlers. This little glen has been known by the name of Sleepy Hollow. A drowsy, dreamy influence seems to hang over this land and pervade its very atmosphere.
Our journey begins with a sweeping view of the New York City skyline from the Hudson River. I say New York City, but until 1664, the Dutch settlers had named it New Amsterdam. Yes, Henry Hudson's voyage was sponsored by the Dutch East India Company. And in the years that followed, Dutch immigrants with names like Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, and Roosevelt populated the area. We'll be checking out their estates on this cruise. Seeing the George Washington Bridge ahead tells us that we are about to leave Manhattan and one of the world's largest natural harbors. As we continue 20 miles upstream, we pass under the Governor Mario M. Cuomo Bridge, which replaced the Tappan Zee Bridge in 2018. Many insist on continuing to call it by its old name. The bridge is 3.1 miles long, took 5 years to complete, and cost nearly $4 billion. It has 8 automobile lanes, 2 bus lanes, and 2 lanes for bicycles and pedestrians. It's New York's most massive bridge project. We've now sailed about 30 miles north of New York City, and this is as close as I care to get to the infamous Sing Sing prison. Now I know what is meant by being sent up the river. The state of New York's maximum security prison is home to about 1,700 inmates and housed the state's execution chamber until capital punishment was abolished in 2004. At least Sing Sing residents have a magnificent river view. Now we're going to go upriver to start our sightseeing from the top down, which means we'll begin at Albany and Troy, close to the headwaters of the Hudson River. Our first dawn was magical. Take a deep breath and enjoy it. When the capital city of Albany came into view, the locals call it Albany, it looked quite modern. But don't be fooled. The state capitol building itself makes a very different impression in this postcard view, and with good reason. It was built in stages from 1867 to 1898, with contributions from 4 different architects. The Romanesque Revival exterior is of solid masonry composed of limestone and white granite, but much of the ornate interior is done in marble. Some of the marble was cut by state prisoners at Sing Sing. A massive dome had been planned but was never added because it would have put too much stress on the structure. The result left New York as having one of only 11 state capitol buildings without a dome. Let's step into the gallery of the Assembly Chamber. The desks have been pushed aside for cleaning, but we can't help but take note of the room's immense size. The chamber was built with what some say is the world's largest open-arched span. The space accommodates 150 representatives and their staff members, of which 105 currently are Democrats. Fancy architectural touches are on full display. Here's a closer look at the stained glass windows. And our guide pointed out how the decoration on every column is unique, so that no 2 capitols are alike. From the Assembly, we made our way to the Senate chamber along an artful path of marble tile. The mosaic artistry is impressive. The elevator we took to the Senate gallery was unapologetically old school. This time the desks were in place, enough to seat a membership of 63 senators, of which 42 are currently Democrats. That means the Democrats control more than 2/3 of each chamber. Our guide was eager to get our minds off of politics and onto the rich decor. He pointed out an entire wall covered in gold leaf. Tradition reigns in the Senate, where no electronic voting system has been installed. It turns out that New York's classic state capitol building is the centerpiece in the ultra-modern Empire State Plaza, a complex of several government buildings and the New York State Museum. Hiding beneath this expansive plaza is an underground shopping concourse filled with artworks donated by Governor Nelson Rockefeller, whose taste was what some would call way out modern. See for yourself. Nearby, we see New York's Executive Mansion, which has been home to 32 governors. The property was once an orchard, but today only one original pear tree remains from the mid-1800s. From our perch atop one of the office buildings in the Empire State Plaza, we have a commanding view of the Hudson River and Albany's downtown area. Let's take a drive to get better acquainted with the city. There are impressive buildings, Dutch influences, even the image of Henry Hudson's sailing ship, the Half Moon, and beautiful residential boulevards. The city population is less than 100,000, many of them government workers. But there are more than 1 million residents in the region they call the Capital District, which encompasses nearby towns such as Troy. But enough driving around. Let's board a sightseeing boat to head toward Troy. It's located about 6 miles north of Albany. As we depart, we pass the System Administration Building for SUNY, which oversees the 64 colleges and universities of the State University of New York. I'm always fascinated by the bridges we encounter. Here's a swing bridge that allows trains to cross the river. These are rare in the United States. This unusual-looking bridge is in the heart of Troy. Troy has an industrial history based on steel and textiles, but today its focus is more high-tech, thanks to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. The Troy Lock and Dam enabled shipping to the Great Lakes via the Erie Canal. The Hudson River may be short, only 315 miles long, but for 2 centuries it was America's most prominent and profitable waterway, opening trade routes north to Canada and west to the Great Lakes. Docking at historic Catskill Point, known as Dutchman's Landing, gave us easy access to the homes of 2 notable 19th century landscape painters, Thomas Cole and Frederick Church. It was Sunday, so I went to church at Olana. The setting was beautiful, and it was easy to see why it was a magnet for artists. We were touring in mid-October, and the promised fall foliage was probably just about as colorful as it was going to get. While Thomas Cole was considered the founder of the Hudson River School of Landscape Painting, Frederick Church was his student and arguably the most prominent practitioner. I chose to tour Olana, Frederick Church's home, because I was told that it was the more unusual and impressive. I was not disappointed. We crossed the Rip Van Winkle Bridge to get there. This view is from Church's veranda. The property and its landscaping are extensive, consisting of a lake, a park with walking paths, farmland, and a road system, as well as the house itself. Church's Persian-inspired castle, as he referred to it, was completed in 1872. He named it Olana for a treasury storehouse in ancient Persia. The architecture reflects a mixture of Victorian, Persian, and Moorish styles. You'll see intricate stenciling inside and out, all designed by Church, who was inspired by his travels in the Middle East. Church also planned the exterior landscaping with an eye toward creating scenes and vistas worthy of painting wherever you looked. Take a walk with me and admire the inviting pathways, the lush gardens, the unique fencing. Inside the house, things are very much as they were when he was alive. He and his wife Isabel raised 4 children here. The exotic furnishings and unusual decor reflect his worldwide travels. You'll find several dozen paintings by Church and his contemporaries, including this one by Thomas Cole. Here's Church's self-portrait. There was a period when Hudson School landscapes fell out of favor because they were not impressionistic. But eventually, Church's paintings were rediscovered and are appreciated for their realistic detail, dramatic light, and panoramic views. His celebrity in his heyday was based on painting and exhibiting very large landscapes, often featuring mountains, waterfalls, and sunsets. When Church died in 1900, his son Louis and wife Sally continued to live here until she died in 1964. Today, the estate is owned by the New York Park System and designated the Olana State Historical Site. As we proceed down the Hudson, our next port will be at Kingston, from which we will explore the mansions of Hyde Park. First up is the summer estate of Frederick Vanderbilt, a grandson of Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, who created the family fortune during the industrial age of the 1800s. The Vanderbilt heirs also built mansions in New York City, Asheville, North Carolina, Suffolk County, New York, and not one but two in Rhode Island. They lived well in the Gilded Age. Before I tell you about the grandson, let's hear about the Commodore.
The Commodore has a much more interesting story than Frederick Vanderbilt, so I'm going to start there. When the Commodore was 16 years old back in 1810, he started his first business. He was able to borrow money from his mother, enough to buy a small periauger. It's a flat-bottom boat. You could either throw a sail on it or row it. And he began to move produce and passengers around New York Harbor. This turned out to be a successful little venture. It's known today as the Staten Island Ferry.
Sad to say, we are not able to go inside the home due to COVID restrictions imposed by the National Park Service. But I can tell you that Frederick Vanderbilt inherited the railroad tycoon genes from his grandfather and was director of the New York Central Railroad for 61 years. Frederick lived in this Beaux-Arts-style home from 1895 until his death in 1938. The site covers 200 acres, and the Hudson River view from here is magnificent.
Now the village of Statsburg, you talk about the Gilded Age, they had 4 estates in Statsburg. We're going to go to the Mills estate. That's the second one over. You got the Catskill Mountains, and I have to tell you, this group is the first group that I have seen the Catskills that clear. So this is terrific.
Welcome to the impressive home of Ogden Mills and his socially prominent wife, Ruth Livingston Mills. Ogden Mills was a financier, philanthropist, and thoroughbred racehorse owner. We are able to go inside since it's operated by the state system of parks rather than the National Park Service. The entryway was designed to impress. This cultural gem was originally built in 1832 and greatly expanded in the 1890s. We won't look at all 64 rooms, 14 bathrooms, and 23 fireplaces, but I think you can get a pretty good idea from what we saw of the Gilded Age lifestyle in the Hudson Valley. This was the fall residence of Ogden and Ruth, who maintained 4 other homes they needed to support their lifestyle. There were parties to throw, balls to give, and dinners to host. Then it was off to their homes in New York City, Paris, Newport, or California. No cost was spared in updating their mansion. Electric lights were installed throughout, and the home was equipped with central heating, even a modern bathroom. Upon Ogden's death in 1929, the home was passed on to their children, who in 1938 donated the house and 192 acres to the state of New York as a memorial to their parents. We travel now to the Roosevelt estate in Hyde Park, very near where we saw the Vanderbilt mansion. Springwood was the family home when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born in 1882. It remained his lifelong home. COVID restrictions prevented us from going inside or touring the Presidential Library and Museum located nearby on the property. The estate was expanded to cover almost 1,500 acres, and 1 million trees were planted. A park ranger gave us some amusing insights, including this story about FDR's brother James.
And this is where Mr. James and his first family of Rebecca Howell and his wife and their son James Roosevelt would live. Yes, you heard me right. The child's name was James Roosevelt. He didn't want an Isaac III, but he didn't want a junior instead, so Roosevelt.
As we wandered around, we saw the coach house and stables. We met statues.
You look at these two guys and what they talked about and what they did for the free world. You know, just incredible.
Here we found Franklin and his wife Eleanor. Then we headed for the Rose Garden and visited their graves. FDR had been elected president 4 times and had to deal with the Great Depression and World War II. Once we crossed the Valkill, that's Dutch for Valley Stream, we found ourselves in the Eleanor Roosevelt National Historic Site. When Franklin was alive, this building was used for one of Eleanor's pet projects, a short-lived experiment that trained unemployed rural folk in traditional crafts. After Franklin died in 1945, Eleanor chose to make Valkill Cottage her home. There and in nearby Stone Cottage, she held retreats, met visiting dignitaries, and hosted her activist associates. Our guide described her as having no pretensions.
Something on the side of the road. Well, I think that's how she furnished her house, with 7 of them. Because the fabric was all different from chair to chair.
Okay.
She didn't care. She didn't care who you were. You came and sat in that chair and talked to her. She was not concerned about anything else.
Before Eleanor's death in 1962, she had written 27 books, 2,500 articles, and more than 550 columns. As with the other estates we had visited, the Roosevelt property offered a peaceful view of the Hudson River. On our initial trip up the Hudson River to reach Albany, we passed West Point and got our first glimpse of the nation's first military academy. Historically, this was a Revolutionary War fort, sitting on strategic high ground extending from the West Bank and forming a point into the river. We'd get a proper tour when we cruised back down the river, and hopefully could see West Point without a storm. This proved to be the only wet weather we experienced on the trip. Leaving the estates of Hyde Park, we headed downriver toward West Point. Before getting there, the city of Newburgh, New York, presented itself. Upon arrival at West Point, a little farther south, we dropped anchor in the river and used a tender to reach the riverfront marina. The West Point Museum provided our introduction to the history of warfare. From ancient times to medieval armor, to the days of King Arthur, and Indian warfare, to ceremonial uniforms, to 20th century armaments, and the intimidation of big guns. The Visitors Center afforded us a beautiful view of the river. Then we could check out a large graphic display that gave us an overview of the campus, which covers 2,500 acres. The dominant architectural style we saw as we toured the campus might be called Gothic Revival or Military Gothic. Even the guardhouse at the entrance carried out the theme. The largest classroom building is Thayer Hall, which was built in 1911 as a riding hall to teach cadets horsemanship. Today, it houses more than 100 classrooms devoted to history, math, behavioral sciences, electrical engineering, and computer science. I was surprised to find that West Point was the first engineering college in the country, starting in 1794, and that almost all early American railways, roads, and bridges were designed by West Point grads. The crown jewel of West Point's Gothic Revival theme is the Cadet Chapel, which dominates the campus skyline and features a cross-shaped floor plan, soaring arches, and ornate stone carvings. Its services are Protestant, but non-denominational, and West Point also has separate chapels for Catholic and Jewish cadets. This building was completed in 1910, and it houses an impressive pipe organ consisting of 23,511 individual pipes. A few of the small ones are visible here. As you can imagine, there are statues and monuments everywhere you look. The polished granite column of the Battle Monument at Trophy Point contains the names of Union soldiers who died in the Civil War. Fame is depicted on the top. This statue is dedicated not to generals and officers, but to enlisted soldiers. Here's another dedicated to the Buffalo Soldier, a nickname given African-American cavalrymen who served after the Civil War. You'd expect to find vintage cannons scattered about, but what's with the chain? These are links from the Great Chain that was laid across the Hudson at West Point in 1777 to protect the colonies from being split by the British in the Revolutionary War. It must have worked. Their ships didn't even try to sail across it. Where are the students, you might ask? Well, here are some participating in a small private ceremony at Trophy Point. We found more cadets on the athletic field. The Corps is divided into companies that compete in a wide variety of intramural athletics. West Point develops what it calls warrior leaders of character, by requiring every cadet to participate in competitive sports throughout the academic year. But it's not all fun and games and free tuition. Cadets are members of the Army from day one and receive pay and benefits while earning their degrees. As newly commissioned officers, they then have to fulfill a service commitment of several years. You might say they graduate with guaranteed employment. Following our tour, a tender returns us to our ship. The American Constitution looks quite majestic from this vantage point, as it comfortably accommodates up to 175 passengers. Our next stop will be another anchorage, this time close to the legendary town of Sleepy Hollow. This is Washington Irving's resting place, and nearby is the Rockefeller family estate and gardens. But since it's close to Halloween, we're going to explore the Gothic Lyndhurst mansion of railroad tycoon Jay Gould. But first, we had to cross the Hudson from our marina in Sleepy Hollow. Remember the $4 billion new Tappan Zee Bridge? Well, this time we are going over it, not under it. And I was mesmerized by the patterns formed by the cables as we crossed. Soon we found ourselves approaching one of America's finest Gothic Revival mansions. The Lyndhurst Mansion was built in stages by 3 different owners starting in 1838 and doubling in size by 1865. The Gothic Revival style of architecture, which we saw in West Point's Cadet Chapel, is characterized by steeply pitched roofs, fanciful turrets, and pointed arches used for windows, doors, and decorative elements like porches, dormers, and roof gables. Its limestone exterior was quarried at nearby Sing Sing. Continuing the Gothic theme inside, we find narrow halls and smaller rooms like this parlor. George Washington's portrait is draped in black as the Lyndhurst Mansion prepares for its upcoming Halloween tours. Here's a pointed window from the inside. It's by Tiffany. The art gallery, with its vaulted ceiling, is home to paintings collected by the Gould family. I particularly like this painting. In the center, draped in black, is a portrait of Jay Gould himself, a railroad tycoon who is considered one of the robber barons of the Gilded Age. He died in 1892 of tuberculosis. The black theme appears again in this well-appointed, high-ceilinged bedroom. In keeping with the Gothic Revival style, the rooms are smaller than in some of the later mansions along the Hudson River, but richly furnished. Here's Jay Gould's desk, which could be folded up and transported with him as he managed his far-flung railroad holdings. If this room seems a little overcrowded, it is. Special collections relating to the superstitions of the age have been brought out and put on display for the upcoming Halloween season. Imagine these rooms draped in candlelight for evening tours. Now let's go outside to see how 19th century landscape design continues to showcase the 67 acres of this National Historic Landmark. As we look out across the rolling lawn as it gently slopes down from the mansion, we see that we are not the only visitors present. Another tour group has come to join us. Others who have enjoyed use of this property since 1970 are movie and TV production companies who have discovered a perfect romantic location for visual storytelling. From a distance, we spot a newer building, which turns out to be a bowling alley and recreation center. And we were surprised to learn that in 2021, the Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show was held here because of COVID concerns in New York City. Now we must say goodbye to Gothic Lyndhurst Mansion before Jay Gould comes back to haunt it at Halloween. From the dramatic wraparound porch, we could see something he never could. The Tappan Zee Bridge, spanning the widest part of the Hudson River. We would be crossing it soon. After our farewell dinner, we left for New York City. It was getting dark. The moon was out. And we got our first illuminated views of the Tappan Zee Bridge. Soon the lights of Manhattan spread out before us. From our top deck, Lady Liberty glided by. I look back on my Hudson River cruise as the perfect way to touch history. Military history, from the Revolutionary War to modern officer training. Cultural history, from early Dutch settlement to fascinating art and architecture. And commercial history, from steamboats and railroad empires to the opulent lifestyle of industrial titans in the Gilded Age. It was a lot to absorb, but a most enjoyable way to do it, to cruise up and down the Hudson River.